My name is Antonia Whitmore, and at 71 years old, I have learned that loss doesn't always arrive with warning. Some wounds come in silence, others with the ring of a telephone. It was late afternoon in Savannah, the air heavy with salt and jasmine drifting from the river. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through Robert's old garden tools that I still hadn't found the courage to give away. The phone rang, and when I saw my daughter's name, Clarabelle, my chest tightened in that mixture of hope and unease that only a mother knows. "Mom?" she said, brisk and cool, no softness in her tone. "We're going tomorrow. Edward and I already made the arrangements. I sold your seaside villa this morning." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The words clattered inside me louder than any dropped dish or slammed door. That villa was not just a property. It was the summer porch where Robert read the paper, the kitchen where I baked her birthday cakes, the windows that faced the ocean like old, watchful eyes. "You sold." My voice thinned, fragile, but steady enough to continue. "You sold the villa." "Yes," she answered, impatient, as though explaining a minor errand. "We needed the money. Don't worry. We'll make sure you have something left over." 45 years of memories reduced to something left over. I pressed my palm against the table, feeling the wood bite my skin. There was so much I could have said, rage, pleading, curses. Instead, I found myself whispering, almost lightly, "You forgot one thing." A pause on the line. Then her puzzled voice. "What do you mean?" I let out a laugh that didn't sound like mine, a small, sharp sound that carried more certainty than grief. "You'll see." Before she could press me, the line went dead. She had hung up as easily as she had severed my past. I sat in the dim kitchen, the silence ringing louder than her words, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt not only sorrow, but a spark of something else, something steady, waiting. The garden tools lay untouched on the table. I gathered them into their box and closed the lid. Tomorrow would not be about sorting Robert's things. Tomorrow would be about remembering what he left me. After Clarabelle's call, I sat in the fading light of the kitchen until the shadows blurred into one another. My hand still rested on the closed box of Robert's tools, the metal edges pressing into my palm. It struck me that even those tools felt more loyal than my own daughter. Robert had been gone only half a year, yet the weight of his absence still filled every room. Some mornings, I still reached across the bed, expecting to find his warmth, only to clutch at empty sheets. I could still hear the echo of his voice, steady, patient, always tinged with humor. He had carried his gentleness into every corner of our lives. The morning he died had begun as all the others. We were in the kitchen, the sun pouring through the wide windows of our home near Forsyth Park. He had brewed my coffee with cream-toasted bread and hummed an old Sam Cooke tune under his breath. When he kissed my forehead and said, "Good morning, my love," I thought it was the beginning of another ordinary day. I didn't know those would be his last words. Minutes later, his hand trembled on the handle of his mug, his eyes widened, and then he was on the floor. The world narrowed to the sound of my own screaming, the cold feel of the tile beneath his cheek, and the siren that arrived too late. Every moment since then had been marked by absence: the empty chair at the head of the table, the silence where his laugh used to be, the hollow space in the garage where he tinkered with the old Ford truck. And now, as if loss hadn't already hollowed me enough, Clarabelle's words sliced into what remained. The seaside villa, our sanctuary. Robert and I bought it when Clarabelle was 15. We didn't have much, but we scraped and saved, pooling the tips from his weekend shifts and my seamstress work. The day we signed the papers, he held my hand so tightly, I thought the bones would crack. "This is for us," he said. "And for her, too. A place where summers last forever." And they did for a time. Summers with Clarabelle laughing on the beach, her feet coated with sand, her voice calling back to us from the surf. Robert grilling shrimp on the porch, smoke curling into the evening air. I would set the table inside, listening to their laughter, carrying through the open windows. Later, as she grew older, she brought friends and then boyfriends, and finally, Edward. I cooked for them all, washed their towels, folded their clothes still warm from the dryer. It was work, yes, but it was also joy, the kind that builds quietly over years until it becomes a life. How could she sell it so easily? How could she strip away the place where her father's hands had repaired shutters, where he planted the rosemary bush by the back steps? Did none of it matter? I rose from the table and walked into the living room. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Robert at the villa, his face browned by sun, a wide grin beneath his straw hat. Claribel had her arms around his neck, both of them squinting into the camera. I touched the glass, tracing his smile with my finger. The betrayal of a child has a different sting than death. Death is final, but it does not choose cruelty. Claribel's choice was deliberate, sharpened by calculation. That was what hollowed me most, not just the loss of a house, but the revelation that she could dismantle her father's memory without hesitation. I carried the photo back into the kitchen, setting it on the table beside the box of tools. The weight of both together was unbearable, and yet it was all I had left to steady me. I drew a long breath and let it out slowly. If Robert were here, he would tell me to stand firm, to remember that roots grow deepest under storm. The phone sat silent on the counter. Claribel's voice still rang inside me, cold and dismissive, but beneath the ache, I felt a thread of resolve beginning to pull taut. Robert's memory was not hers to erase, and though grief pressed hard against me, it was beginning to make room for something else, something I would need in the days ahead. That night, I barely slept. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. Each creak of the floorboards reminding me of footsteps that would never return. I lay staring at the ceiling, Robert's smile from the photograph still etched behind my eyelids. The betrayal from Claribel burned hot, but beneath it something else stirred memory. Sharp and insistent. 3 days before he died, Robert had handed me a manila envelope. I remembered the feel of it in my palms, stiff and weighty. "Put this in your dresser," he had said gently, as if asking me to mind a secret for him. "If something happens to me, open it when you're ready, not before." At the time, I hadn't questioned him. We'd been married long enough for me to trust his instincts. After the funeral, numb with grief, I had tucked it away and tried not to think of it again. But now, with Claribel's voice still echoing in my head, the memory pressed hard against me. I rose before dawn, the kitchen still cloaked in gray light. The box of tools and the framed photo sat where I'd left them, silent sentinels on the table. I walked down the hall to my bedroom, opened the dresser drawer, and pushed past folded scarves and gloves. There it was, exactly where I'd hidden it, a plain manila envelope with my name written across the front in Robert's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where Robert once tied his shoes, and whistled softly before heading to work. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. Inside lay a stack of documents bound with a rubber band, and on top, a folded letter. Robert's handwriting spread across the page, firm and familiar. "My dearest Antonia," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. Forgive me for keeping this from you while I lived. I wanted to protect you from worry and from temptation. Over the years, I invested everything we saved. Every overtime shift, every penny from your sewing, every careful dollar. I built more than you knew, my love. You thought we had only the villa, but we have so much more." I blinked hard, trying to steady the blur of tears. He listed them carefully, 6 other properties across Savannah, including an apartment building near the river. Shares in 3 companies, each of them profitable. bank accounts under a company he'd quietly created years earlier with me named as the sole heir. I read the numbers twice then, a third time, unable to believe. Figures that seemed unreal sat before me. Balances I had never imagined enough to lift me far beyond the modest life I thought we'd lived. You are rich, Antonia. Rich in paper, yes, but richer in what we built together. Do not be afraid. This is yours. It has always been yours. I only ask one thing. Do not let our daughter know until you are sure of her heart. She must love you for who you are not, for what you own. My breath caught. He had seen through her long before I could admit it. He had anticipated the hunger in her voice, the convenience in her smile. I spread the documents across the bed. Deeds marked with our names, contracts with neat signatures, bank certificates stamped and sealed. Robert, my bus driver husband, the man who rose before dawn every day for 40 years, had quietly built an empire under my nose. A laugh slipped out bitter and awed all at once. Clarabelle thought she had stripped me bare, that selling the villa and Robert's truck had left me with nothing. She had no idea that she'd only brushed the surface, that the roots of our life reached deeper than she ever suspected. The room brightened as dawn edged through the curtains. I gathered the papers, carefully stacking them as if they were fragile porcelain. The grief of the last months did not vanish, but it shifted, steadied by the weight in my lap. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt more than sorrow. I felt strength, quiet, deliberate, and utterly mine. I tucked the documents back into the envelope and placed it gently on the nightstand. Outside, the first birds began to call their voices, carrying thin and hopeful through the morning air. Robert had left me a map, a shield, and a choice. And I knew with a certainty that startled me that I would not waste any of it. The morning after I opened Robert's envelope, I went to my appointment with Dr. Hamlin. Clarabelle had arranged it weeks earlier, part of her performance of dutiful daughterhood. You need a full checkup now that you're alone, she had said with a smile that looked like care, but I now knew was calculation. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee gone stale. I sat in one of those green plastic chairs that seemed designed to punish the back. Around me were other patients coughing, shifting, flipping through magazines that nobody really read. My name was called, and I followed the nurse to the exam room. Dr. Hamlin, a kind-eyed man in his 50s, pressed his stethoscope to my chest and listened carefully. Your heart sounds strong, he said. Your blood pressure is good for your age. You could use more rest, better meals, but overall, Mrs. Moreno, you're in good health. I smiled politely, thanked him, but my mind wasn't in that room. It was still on the envelope, on Robert's careful words, on the list of properties and bank accounts I now carried inside my purse. For months, I had thought myself small, fragile, discarded. Now, I knew I was sitting on ground, as solid as stone. When the appointment ended, I stepped out into the bright savanna air. The sky was a hard blue clouds drifting like feathers. I walked slowly to the bus stop, Clarabelle having taken what she believed was my only vehicle. The old Ford pickup she sold for pennies had carried Robert's scent in its seats, and part of me ached for it. But standing at the curb waiting with the rest of the city's weary souls, I felt something else, an unfamiliar calm. I adjusted the strap of my bag. The envelope nestled deep inside. Clarabelle thought she had stripped me bare. She imagined me powerless, reduced to pleading, but she was wrong. And the irony made me smile, not wide, not triumphant, but a small, secret curve of the lips. The kind of smile Robert used to give when he fixed something around the house before anyone else noticed it was broken. A young mother stood nearby with her toddler, tugging at her skirt. An older man leaned on his cane, muttering about the late bus. To anyone passing, I was just another woman waiting for a ride, nothing special. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The bus arrived with its usual screech of brakes. I climbed aboard, dropped my fare into the box, and took a seat by the window. The city rolled past in fragments, a bakery with morning customers, teenagers in backpacks, shopkeepers lifting their shutters. Everyone was hurrying, everyone carrying private burdens. I too carried mine, but it was no longer grief alone. It was power folded into papers waiting for the right moment. I thought of calling Clarabelle, then telling her I knew everything, demanding explanations. But what good would that do? Anger was quick, noisy, and useless. Robert had taught me that patience builds stronger foundations. A house hammered together in a rush won't stand the storm. So I decided not to confront her. Not yet. Let her believe she had succeeded. Let her play at being clever, at being in control. The longer she believed I was helpless, the sharper the lesson would be when she discovered the truth. The bus rattled over the bridge, sunlight flashing on the Savannah River below. I placed my hand on the envelope through the fabric of my purse and thought of Robert. "It's about time you stood up for yourself," he had said in my dream the other night. I closed my eyes, leaned back against the seat, and allowed the rhythm of the road to carry me home. For the first time in months, my grief didn't feel like an anchor. It felt like a tide turning. The morning light was sharp and unforgiving as I walked down Bull Street, my heels clicking against the old brick sidewalk. Savannah had a way of carrying its history in every corner. The wrought iron balconies, the moss dripping from the oaks, the courthouses standing like guardians of forgotten promises. I clutched my purse, tight, the manila envelope inside it, my shield and my secret. Mr. Peterson's office was on the second floor of an old limestone building near the square. I had met him only once before at Robert's funeral. He had pressed my hand and murmured condolences. His eyes steady, the kind that belonged to someone who had spent a lifetime untangling the messes of other people's lives. I had filed him away in my mind as a man of quiet reliability. I stepped into the office, greeted by the faint smell of leather and paper. The receptionist, a young woman with a neat bun, led me down the hall. When I entered, Mr. Peterson stood from behind a wide oak desk. He was tall with thinning hair and a slow, deliberate way of moving, as though each gesture had been considered before it was made. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly, "it's good to see you again, though I wish it were under gentler circumstances. Please call me Antonia," I replied, lowering myself into the chair across from him. He studied me for a moment, perhaps expecting tears or the fragility of a grieving widow. Instead, I laid the envelope on his desk, sliding it toward him with steady hands. "Robert left me these. I need your help understanding them and protecting what is mine." Mr. Peterson opened the envelope carefully, his brows lifting, as he sifted through the deeds, the bank statements, the letter. His lips moved slightly as he read, though no words came out. Finally, he looked up. "Your husband was a meticulous man. These documents are in order. More than that, they are formidable." I said nothing, only nodded. "From what I see, Mrs. Whitmore, the villa your daughter sold was never legally hers to sell. Title rests with a holding company Robert created. You are its sole beneficiary. The sale can be nullified on grounds of fraud." The word hung in the air, fraud. It should have tasted bitter, but instead it carried a kind of clarity, like a blade sharpened clean. "And the truck?" I asked quietly. "That may be more complicated," he admitted. "If your daughter used power of attorney documents, we would need to prove misrepresentation. Do you recall signing anything?" I closed my eyes, recalling those first days after Robert's death. The blur of papers my daughter urging me to sign, quickly her voice syrupy with supposed care. "Yes," I whispered. I signed. I didn't read. I trusted her. Mr. Peterson leaned back, folding his hands. "Then we build our case slowly. We start with the villa. That is clear. As for the truck, we gather evidence. In time, we will get it back, but we must be patient. Patience. The word felt both like a curse and a balm. I don't want my daughter destroyed, I said. I want her to learn. His eyes softened, but his voice remained measured. Then we proceed discreetly. I will nullify the villa sale quietly. Ensure the assets are returned to your control. No noise, no scandal. She doesn't have to know yet. I exhaled my shoulders, easing for the first time in weeks. Yes, that is what I want. Silence for now. Mr. Peterson gathered the papers into a neat stack. Leave these with me. I'll begin today. It may take weeks, perhaps months, but the law is on your side, Antonia. You have more power than you realize. As I left his office, the square outside buzzed with the hum of traffic and conversation life, moving as if nothing had changed. But I had changed. For the first time since Robert's death, I was not simply enduring. I was planning. The manila envelope no longer weighed on me. The burden had shifted into action, into a quiet current, moving beneath the surface of my ordinary widow's life. Clarabelle thought she had stripped me of everything. She had no idea the ground she stood on was mine. The phone rang just after dawn, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet kitchen. I was at the table with my coffee, Robert's papers neatly stacked beside me, their edges sharp against my fingertips. I let the phone ring twice then, 3 times before I picked up. Mom Clarabelle's voice carried across the line, lighter than it had been the day she told me about the villa. She sounded almost cheerful. Yes, I answered my voice. Calm, steady. I just wanted to let you know everything went smoothly, she said. Edward handled the transfers and we already deposited your share. My share. I repeated the words as fragile as glass. Of course. We didn't want you to be left with nothing. We left you 30%, Mom. That's fair, right, fair? The words sliced sharper than any paper cut. My share of my own life, my own history parceled out as though I were a child being handed allowance money. I pressed my palm flat on the table, holding the anger steady beneath my skin. 30%, I said softly, as though testing the sound. Yes, she replied brightly. We need the rest for our investment in Europe. Edward has a wonderful business opportunity. He's sure it will change our lives. But don't worry, Mom. With your portion, you'll be able to manage for a few months. And when we come back, we'll help you find something smaller. Something that fits your needs. Something smaller. Something that fits my needs. I stared at the grain of the wooden table, each line etched deeper with the weight of her words. You've always been so compassionate, Clarabelle continued. I knew you'd understand. I felt my lips twitch into a smile, though not the smile she imagined. It wasn't compassion, but something colder, harder. When are you leaving? I asked. This afternoon. Our bags are already packed. We'll be gone at least 6 months, maybe longer if the business takes off. It's so exciting, Mom. We'll send pictures. 6 months of silence. 6 months of her believing she had won. I could hear the rustle of movement behind her, Edward's muffled voice, the sound of zippers and suitcases. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was discarding me like old linens while laughing about new beginnings. All right, Clarabelle, I said. Have a safe trip. Oh, Mom, thank you. I knew you'd understand. We love you. The line went dead. I sat in the kitchen with the receiver still warm in my hand. Outside, a bird trilled from the magnolia tree, sharp and insistent, as though mocking me. 30%. They had sold Robert's truck for pennies, the villa for less than it was worth, and still thought themselves generous. I pushed the phone aside and unfolded Robert's documents once more. Deeds, certificates, accounts, all of them untouched by Clarabelle's hands. All of them mine. The irony was unbearable and delicious in equal measure. My daughter believed she had left me with scraps. She had no idea she had only brushed against the surface of a fortune she couldn't begin to fathom. But what stung wasn't the money. It was the smile in her voice when she justified taking it. That smile was worse than theft itself. I gathered the papers into their folder, slid them back into the envelope, and closed it with care. The edges caught at my skin, thin and sharp. Paper cuts, I thought. Small wounds that sting longer than deep ones. I reached for my coffee, now gone cold, and took a sip anyway. The bitterness suited me. The morning after Clarabelle's call, I stepped onto the porch with my watering can. The geraniums in their clay pots drooped a little, and I tilted the spout slowly, letting the water darken the soil. Across the street, Mrs. Albright waved as she pulled weeds from her flower bed. Her smile was soft, almost pitying the way people look at someone they've already decided is fragile. "Morning, Antonia," she called. "How are you holding up? Must be hard with Clarabelle gone so suddenly." I nodded, keeping my expression resigned. "It's an adjustment," I said. She clucked her tongue. "If you need groceries or company, you just let me know. Don't be too proud to ask." I thanked her, forcing a thin smile. She didn't need to know I had been on the phone with Mr. Peterson the evening before, discussing the legal papers that would quietly return the seaside villa to my name within weeks. Let her think me lonely. Let her offer soup and sympathy. That was the role I played, now the poor widow left behind. Inside, my kitchen table had transformed into a command center. The manila envelope was joined by neat folders. Mr. Peterson prepared for me color-coded tabs marking deeds, corporate documents, account summaries. I studied them each afternoon like a student tracing numbers. I still struggled to comprehend, memorizing the names of properties Robert had shielded behind that modest bus driver's life. One folder listed tenants' families renting units in buildings I owned without their knowing. I ran my finger down the columns, recognizing surnames from neighborhoods across the city. The thought that Clarabelle's own apartment rested on ground she didn't know was mine nearly made me laugh. It was a cruel irony, but I kept it to myself. In the evenings, I returned to my role. Aurora, my neighbor of 40 years, stopped by with a casserole one night. She looked at me with the same mixture of kindness and relief that people wear when tragedy belongs to someone else. "I don't know how you do it," she said, setting the dish on the counter. "After Robert, and now Clarabelle, off chasing her dreams. You're strong, Antonia. Stronger than I'd be." I touched her hand gently. Strength is just another word for surviving. We ate together at the kitchen table, Aurora talking about her grandchildren, while I nodded and smiled. I did not mention that earlier that afternoon, I had spoken to Mr. Peterson about restructuring ownership of a downtown property, moving it into my direct control. The less anyone knew, the safer it was. When Aurora left, I sat in the quiet house and let the silence settle. I thought about Robert's letter about his warning that if Clarabelle knew the truth, she would change. He had been right. My daughter had shown her hunger for wealth when she thought it scarce. What would she have become if she had known abundance waited just beyond her reach? That night, I lay in bed and listened to the distant hum of the city. To the world, I was a widow reduced to 30% of her life. To myself, I was a woman rising from the ashes of loss, her hands steady on the reins of an empire built in secret. I smiled in the dark. Let them pity me. Pity was a cloak I could wear as long as needed, while beneath it I gathered my strength. The first whisper came from Aurora, though she spoke as if she were merely passing on gossip about the weather. We were standing by her gate, the scent of her roses drifting on the warm air when she leaned closer. "Antonia, have you heard about Edward?" she asked, her voice dropping. I shook my head. "No. What about him?" She glanced up and down the street before continuing. "My brother-in-law works at the bank. He said Edward owes money all over town. Big money. And there are questions about the way he took out the loans. I kept my face still, though my pulse quickened. Questions, signatures, apparently. Documents that don't look right. Some say he forged names. It's only a matter of time before it catches up with him. I thanked her, then returned to my house with careful steps, holding the news like fragile glass. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table and spread Robert's folders out before me. My eyes lingered on the list of properties, one in particular, the apartment building where Clarabelle and Edward lived before leaving for Europe. The irony was heavy. They had leveraged what was never theirs to leverage. Later that week, Mr. Peterson confirmed what Aurora had hinted. He phoned in the evening, his voice grave but steady. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I've been looking into some records. Edward Whitfield has accumulated considerable debt, over 100,000, maybe more. What's worse, some of the loan papers include your daughter's name. But I believe her signature was forged." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing hard. "You're certain as one can be from these copies. If the banks pursue this, Angela may be held responsible unless we can prove fraud." Clarabelle, always so sure Edward was brilliant, that his deals would lift them into a life of glamour. I had warned her years ago that ambition without honor is just hunger in disguise. She hadn't listened. Now the disguise was slipping. "Keep looking," I told Peterson. Quietly. When I hung up, the silence in the kitchen felt alive, buzzing. I poured myself a glass of water, the rim trembling against my lips. Clarabelle thought she had cast me aside for a golden future. Instead, she was following Edward into quicksand. Over the next days, rumors thickened. At the bakery, 2 women murmured about creditors chasing Edward. At church, someone mentioned his name in a hushed tone, shaking their head. Even Mrs. Albright, usually slow to believe anything unproven, muttered about young men who build castles on borrowed sand. I listened, nodded, kept my widow's mask in place. They all assumed I was merely enduring more disappointment, another burden laid on my shoulders. If only they knew I was charting every word, every hint, storing it like ammunition. At night, I dreamed of Robert again. He stood in the villa's garden, his hands dirty with soil planting seedlings. "Cracks start small," he told me in the dream. "But if you watch, you'll see where the ground is shifting." I woke with those words echoing inside me, and I knew Edward was the fault line, and Clarabelle stood right on top of it. I folded away the rumors and the proof into a mental box, locking it as carefully as Robert had locked his fortune. When the quake came, I would be ready. For now, I played the poor widow, pitied by neighbors, underestimated by everyone, including my own daughter. The papers on my table rustled in the breeze from the open window. I set my hand on them to keep them still, as if to say not yet. Mr. Peterson's office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, a place where words carried weight. I sat across from him as he adjusted his glasses, scanning a set of papers he had drafted with his careful hand. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, his voice low, "and even the building your daughter occupied with Edward is held through Robert's company, just as the documents in the envelope stated. As sole heir, you have full authority to act. We can issue an eviction notice immediately." The phrase struck me with an almost electric force. Eviction notice. 2 words that could shake the very floor under my daughter's feet. I folded my hands in my lap. "And she won't know I'm behind it." Peterson shook his head. "It will come from the company Robert Investments, Inc. Unless you choose otherwise, your name won't appear anywhere." I let out a slow breath. The choice was mine. I could confront, demand apologies, or I could do what Robert would have done, act with precision, not passion. "Prepare it," I said. He nodded once. "We'll give her 30 days as required by law." More than generous. When I left his office, the afternoon heat pressed down, but inside me, a cool certainty had settled. Clarabelle thought herself untouchable boarding planes, sipping champagne, investing in Edward's hollow promises. But the roof she believed was hers would soon remind her of its true owner. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine. The documents were spread before me, neat and final. I traced Robert's name on the company letterhead, imagining his hand steadying mine. "It's time," I whispered. 2 weeks later, Aurora came rushing to my porch, her voice pitched high with the thrill of news. "Antonia, did you hear Clarabelle's apartment building? Something's happening with the leases. People are saying they're under review. I think the tenants received notices." I placed a hand on my chest, feigning surprise. "Notices, yes," Aurora said, eyes wide. "Even your Clarabelle. Can you imagine those luxury units, and suddenly everyone's talking about eviction?" I shook my head slowly, as if stunned. Inside, my heart beat with a measured rhythm, the sound of gears turning exactly as I had set them. That evening, while the cicadas sang in the trees, I imagined Clarabelle returning from Europe to a letter waiting in her mailbox. She would tear it open expecting bank statements or glossy flyers, only to find Robert's company name staring back at her. 30 days. No discussion. No appeal. The same cold efficiency she had once shown me. I pictured her confusion first, then disbelief, then panic. Perhaps she would call Edward, though. By now even he must have felt the walls close in. Perhaps she would remember the phone call when she sold the villa and realize how easily a life can be taken from your hands. I didn't rejoice. My wine wasn't sweeter. My sleep no deeper, but I felt a kind of balance returning, as though the scales Robert had always kept even were tilting back to their rightful place. Peterson called to confirm delivery. "The notice was served this morning," he said. "The doorman confirmed your daughter received it in person." I closed my eyes, picturing her face. My own daughter standing in the marble foyer of a building she thought was hers, holding a letter that proved otherwise. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said softly. The night air drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of river water and magnolia. I leaned back in my chair, letting the coolness settle on my skin. For months, I had been the widow everyone pitied. Tonight, I was the quiet architect of my daughter's unraveling. The walls of that apartment would no longer shelter her. They would remind her that every choice has a cost, and every betrayal leaves a trail that circles back home. Aurora was the first to bring me the news. She arrived on my porch with her shawl half slipped from one shoulder, cheeks flushed from walking quickly. "Antonia," she said, her voice low with urgency. "Your daughter. She's back. I saw her last night at the airport. Alone. No Edward." I felt a stillness inside me, like the pause between thunder and lightning. "Alone," Aurora nodded. She looked dreadful, thin, pale, like someone who had been crying for days. She had only one suitcase. Something must have gone wrong. Something. Or everything. I thanked Aurora and sent her home, then closed my door and sat at the kitchen table where so many truths had unfolded. It didn't surprise me that Edward had left her. A man who could live on lies eventually starves when the lies run out. What surprised me was how quickly it had come to pass. By the next afternoon, my phone rang. Her voice, when it came, was raw. Mom Clarabelle whispered, I need to see you." I steadied my breath. "Where are you?" "At the apartment," she said, then broke off with a bitter laugh. "Well, what's left of it? The locks don't work with my key anymore." "Edward, he stayed in Paris. He's not coming back." I let the silence hang a moment. "Come here then. We'll talk." An hour later, I opened my front door and scarcely recognized my daughter. Her hair was dull, her eyes rimmed with red. The clothes that had once cost more than my month's groceries were wrinkled, travel-stained. She carried one suitcase, dragging it across the porch, like a weight she could barely lift. "Mom," she said again, and this time her voice cracked. For a moment, I thought she might collapse into my arms, but she stopped short, as if afraid I might turn her away. "Come in, Clarabelle," I said, stepping aside. She moved into the house slowly, her eyes darting across the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, as though she had never seen them before. I led her to the kitchen, poured her a glass of water, and waited. She drank, then set the glass down with shaking hands. "He left me," she said. "Edward, there was no business in Europe. There was nothing, just debts he ran from. And another woman." I watched her carefully. "And what did he leave you with?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Bills, bank calls, and an eviction notice. I don't even know who sent it. Some company with Dad's name on it." My heart tightened, but I kept my face still. "And now I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. "I thought, maybe, just for a little while I could stay here. Until I find something. A job. A place." I looked at her. Truly looked. Not the polished, dismissive woman who had sold my memories for quick money, but a hollowed figure stripped of her illusions. The arrogance was gone, the certainty cracked. "You can stay," I said at last. Her eyes widened, shining with tears she tried to hide. She nodded quickly, as though afraid the offer might vanish if she lingered too long. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I won't be a burden." She lifted her suitcase and carried it toward her old room, the one where she had slept as a girl before the world hardened her heart. I stood in the hallway watching her, the air thick with memory. For the first time in months, my house wasn't empty, but neither was it at peace. The first night Clarabelle slept in her old room, I lay awake, listening to the restless creak of the bed springs down the hall. It was the same twin bed she'd once filled with stuffed animals and glittery pillows, but now it held a woman, 39 years old, curled against the weight of her own mistakes. In the morning, I found her in the kitchen, hair tangled, staring at the classified section she had spread across the table. Her fingers traced the ads as if she could will one into salvation. "I'll find something soon," she muttered more to herself than to me. I only poured her coffee and slid the sugar bowl closer. "One step at a time," I said. For the next week she tried. She ironed her blouse, borrowed my sensible handbag, and walked into banks' offices and retail stores with hopeful eyes. Each evening, she returned with shoulders bowed, the same answer trailing her no. They cited her credit history, the legal disputes tied to Edward's debts, the uncertainty of her finances. She had been marked, and in this city marks traveled faster than resumes. One evening, she dropped the handbag on the floor and sank into a chair. "They won't touch me, Mom. Not one of them. I'm poison on paper." I stirred a pot of stew, the wooden spoon heavy in my hand. "Poison on paper," I repeated softly. "But paper burns. Character doesn't." She didn't answer. Her eyes were empty, staring past the wall. The next morning, she came home later than usual, her blouse damp with sweat, her hands raw pink. She stood in the doorway clutching a folded flyer. "They'll take me," she said. "It's night work. Cleaning offices downtown. Minimum pay, no questions asked." The words seemed to catch in her throat, as if she wasn't sure whether to be ashamed or relieved. I dried my hands on a towel and met her eyes. "Then you'll learn something useful." The first night she went, she returned after 2 in the morning. Shoulders slumped the scent of bleach clinging to her clothes. She set her shoes by the door and leaned against the wall, trembling. "It's harder than I thought," she whispered. "The scrubbing, the hauling. My arms feel like they'll fall off." I guided her to a chair, poured her a glass of water, and placed it in her hand. "Hard isn't the same as impossible," I told her. Each night after that, she went again. I watched the changes, the blisters forming on her palms, the way her back stiffened with each climb up the stairs, the shadows under her eyes deepening. But I also saw something else. She no longer woke past 10. She no longer complained about small inconveniences. She began eating the simplest meals with gratitude, as though each bite carried more meaning than the expensive dinners Edward once paid for on borrowed money. One Sunday morning, as we sat side by side on the porch, she sighed and looked at her hands. "I used to think dignity meant silk dresses and champagne glasses," she said. "Now I think maybe it means this working when no one's watching, coming home exhausted, but knowing you earned your pillow." I sipped my tea and said nothing, only nodded. The lesson was writing itself into her bones. That night, while she scrubbed office floors under harsh fluorescent lights, I sat at my kitchen table with Robert's papers spread before me. Claribel believed she was at rock bottom, and perhaps she was, but I knew the truth. Rock bottom was also a foundation. The bank lobby was hushed, the marble floor gleaming under the morning light. I had arranged the appointment with Mr. Peterson, who now walked beside me with his briefcase, his calm presence steadying my nerves. Claribel trailed behind us, her heels clicking too loudly, her eyes darting with the restless energy of someone expecting salvation. We were led into a private room, and the banker, a young man with polite eyes, slid a key across the table. "Mrs. Whitmore, this belongs to you. Your husband placed the box in our vault many years ago." My fingers closed over the key, cool and heavy. Robert's foresight reached further than I had realized. Moments later, the safety deposit box lay before us, a plain steel container. I unlocked it slowly, the key turning with a final, deliberate click. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, were pieces of jewelry I hadn't seen in decades. Robert's mother's sapphire brooch. The string of pearls he gave me on our 25th anniversary. A diamond ring I had never known existed. The jewels glittered under the fluorescent light, their fire alive even in the sterile room. The banker's voice was careful when he said, "These have been appraised before. Current market value is estimated around $200,000. I caught my breath. It wasn't the number that shook me, it was the weight of memory in each piece. Robert had hidden not just wealth, but symbols, stories bound in gold and stone. Claribel leaned forward, her eyes wide, her voice quick. 200,000 that could cover Edward's debts. If we sell them, Mom, we could clean the slate. Start fresh. Her words struck me like ice water. Even stripped of everything, even scrubbing office floors at night, she still measured love in currency. "These aren't for Edward," I said quietly. She turned to me, desperation tightening her face. "But it's the only chance, Mom. If we pay off what he owes, maybe he'll come back." Maybe I raised my hand, stopping her. Edward is gone, and debts born of lies cannot be buried with jewels. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked back at the brooch, the pearls, the diamonds, her reflection fractured in their sharp edges. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, the decision is yours alone. You can keep them in storage, display them, or liquidate if you wish." "I'll keep them," I said firmly. Claribel's chair scraped against the floor as she shifted. "You're choosing memories over survival." I met her eyes, steady. "No, I'm choosing dignity over illusion." The jewels lay between us, glittering like silent witnesses. Claribel's shoulders sagged, her hope collapsing under the refusal she hadn't expected. On the way home, she didn't speak. She stared out the bus window, her hands clenched in her lap. I watched the city roll by the squares, the river, the cobblestones, and felt Robert's presence stronger than ever. He hadn't left me wealth to spend recklessly. He had left me anchors, each piece a reminder of the life we built together, of the legacy that wasn't for sale. That evening, I returned the jewels to the velvet cloth and placed them in the drawer of my dresser. Claribel's footsteps echoed down the hall as she closed her bedroom door. The house settled into silence, but the air between us had changed. She had glimpsed another reservoir of strength, and she knew it wasn't hers to touch. Claribel left the house at dusk, her figure framed in the glow of the streetlights. She wore a plain blouse and slacks that once would have embarrassed her, clutching a lunch bag I had packed with sandwiches and fruit. She didn't meet my eyes as she closed the door. Pride bent her head lower than poverty did. Hours later, I lay awake, listening for the sound of her return. But before that, I imagined her in the fluorescent-lit corridors of office towers, her soft hands gripping a mop handle for the first time. When she finally shuffled back through the door near dawn, her steps were heavy, her hair clinging damp to her temples. She smelled faintly of bleach and sweat. She tried to walk past me silently, but I was waiting at the kitchen table with a pot of tea. "How was it?" I asked softly. She sat lowering herself slowly into the chair, as though her bones ached. Her palms were red, a small blister blooming on one thumb. "Hard," she muttered. "Harder than I thought." I poured tea into her cup. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the steam rise into her face. "There was this older woman there," she said, after a pause. "Her name's Lorraine. She showed me how to wring the mop properly, how to pace myself, so my back doesn't give out. She's been doing it for 20 years. Her voice faltered, and she stared into the tea. She looked at me and said, "There are two kinds of cleaners, honey. Those without chances, and those who wasted theirs. Which are you?" I felt the words settle in the room like dust. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Clarabelle shook her head. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her I wasn't supposed to be there, that I wasn't like them. But the truth is, I am. I wasted mine. I threw everything away on Edward's promises. Her shoulders shook once, not with tears, but with the raw weight of realization. I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. She flinched at first, then let it rest. "Perhaps that woman gave you a gift," I said. "Not everyone sees their mistakes while there's still time to change." She sipped her tea, her eyes tired but softer than I had seen in years. "I don't know if I can do it again tomorrow." "You can," I said, "and you will, one night at a time." For the first time, she didn't argue. She only nodded as if surrendering to a truth she could no longer outrun. When she rose to go to her room, she paused in the doorway. "Mom," she murmured, almost ashamed. "Thank you for letting me come back. I don't deserve it." I didn't answer. Some truths are stronger in silence. As her door closed, I sat alone in the kitchen with the faint smell of bleach still lingering in the air. Lorraine's words echoed in my mind too. Those without chances. And those who wasted theirs. My daughter had fallen into the second category. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way for her to climb back out. The kettle hissed softly on the stove and I poured myself another cup. The night was almost gone, but morning had not yet arrived. Somewhere between them, my daughter was learning what Robert had always known. Dignity isn't found in what you own, but in what you endure. Mr. Peterson called on a gray Wednesday morning. His voice carried the same steady weight as always, but I could hear a thread of urgency beneath it. "Mrs. Whitmore, I believe we have what we need. May I come by this afternoon?" I agreed, and by 2 o'clock he was seated at my kitchen table, the familiar spread of folders and documents before us. Clarabelle was at her cleaning job, the smell of bleach still faintly clinging to her coat, left on the hook by the door. Peterson adjusted his glasses, flipping open a folder marked in red. "Edward's dealings were worse than we thought. He used your daughter's name to secure no less than 6 loans, all forged signatures. The handwriting analysis is conclusive." He tapped a page with his finger. "And here, this is the most damning. He attempted to use Robert's old records, altering them, to show collateral that never existed." I traced the neat rows of letters, the loops and strokes that mimicked Clarabelle's hand, but lacked its natural curve. My stomach turned. "And the banks accepted this." "They did," Peterson said, his voice tight. "Banks are not immune to charm, Mrs. Whitmore. Edward knew how to look credible long enough to get his way, but charm doesn't stand in court. Fraud leaves a trail, and we've gathered it. I let his words sink in. Fraud, conclusive. Court. What happens now, I asked. We prepare filings to absolve your daughter from liability, he explained. The forged signatures make her legally innocent, though the process will take time. Some creditors will push back, but the evidence is strong. It's only a matter of threading the needle carefully, one misstep, and they'll try to pin part of this on her. And Edward Peterson closed the folder with a snap. He will face charges, though, from abroad. It may take months to bring him back, if he ever returns at all. I sat back, feeling both relief and weariness wash over me. My daughter had tied her life to a man of smoke and lies. Now she was tangled in the ruin he left, and it would take every ounce of patience to unwind her from it. Peterson leaned forward. There is one more thing. We can use Robert's company to act as guarantor on the strongest claims. That way, if creditors press too hard, we shield Clarabelle without exposing you personally. Quiet, clean, and effective. The thought of stepping into the storm under Robert's company name brought a pang to my chest. It was as if his hand still reached out, steadying both me and our daughter, even from the grave. Do it, I said. Peterson nodded, once his eyes softening. You're protecting her even now, though she doesn't know. I looked at the stack of papers, the neat black ink that spelled out both betrayal and salvation. She'll know in time, I murmured. When he left, I remained at the table, staring at the manila folders, their corners worn from being opened and closed so often. Outside, the street was quiet, the late light slanting gold across the magnolia tree. Clarabelle would return soon, tired from her shift, her hands raw from bleach and scrubbing. She would sit where Peterson had sat, unaware that the seat was still warm with the weight of her salvation. I rose and gathered the folders, sliding them back into the envelope Robert had once entrusted to me. Every page was another stitch in the fabric of a net I hoped would hold her when she finally stopped falling. The needle was threaded. All that remained was the slow, careful work of pulling her life back together, strand by fragile strand. Mr. Peterson's office felt heavier that day, as though the walls themselves understood the weight of what was about to be said. Clarabelle sat beside me, her knees pressed tightly together, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to account. She wore the same blouse she had worn to her first cleaning shift, its collar fraying, now her face lined with exhaustion. Peterson placed a neat stack of papers on the desk, his expression calm but grave. We've filed the necessary motions, he said. The forged loans will be voided, Mrs. Whitmore. Legally, your daughter carries no debt from Edward's schemes. It will take time, but her name will clear. Clarabelle let out a breath that sounded more like a sob. So it's over. I'm free. Peterson nodded once. You are? She turned to me, then her eyes wide, still bright with disbelief. Mom, did you hear that I'm free? It's like a miracle. I held her gaze steady and unblinking. It's not a miracle, Clarabelle. It's work. It's patience. It's your father's foresight and Mr. Peterson's diligence. Her brow furrowed. But how did you even have the money for this? How did you fight them? I drew in a long breath and reached into my purse. From it, I slid the manila envelope onto the desk, the one Robert had given me months before his death. Its edges were softened now, its contents no longer secret, but sharpened into purpose. This, I said quietly, this is how. Clarabelle looked at it, confusion flickering across her face. I opened it slowly, showing her the deeds, the bank accounts, the jewel inventory, the villa's title freshly restored in my name. I laid them out one by one like cards in a game she hadn't known existed. Her hand shot to her mouth. All this time, she whispered. All this time you had this? Yes, I said simply. Her face went pale, then flushed. And you let me scrub toilets at midnight. You let me beg for jobs, walk home with blisters, eat from your table like a child when you had all this." Her voice rose, trembling with fury and humiliation. "Why let me suffer?" I leaned forward, my own voice steady, but sharp. "So you would finally understand what respect means. Respect for work. Respect for the roof over your head. Respect for the people who raised you." She shook her head violently, tears spilling now. "You could have spared me, and what would you have learned?" I cut in. "That wealth erases mistakes. That betrayal has no cost. You sold the villa as if it were yours to trade away. You looked me in the eye and left me with scraps. You needed to feel hunger. Clarabelle, you needed to touch the ground you thought you were above." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her ragged breathing. Then her shoulders slumped, her fury dissolving into a hollow kind of grief. "I thought I was saving us," she whispered. "I thought Edward was the way forward." I softened then, just slightly. "You were saving him, not us. And he left you. The way forward isn't through someone else's lies. It's through your own hands, your own choices." Peterson cleared his throat gently, gathering the documents back into a neat pile. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "perhaps we should give you a moment." He excused himself, leaving us in the heavy silence. Clarabelle stared at her lap, tears dripping onto her skirt. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said finally. I reached across the desk, placing my hand over hers. Her skin was rougher now, the blisters healing, but still tender. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," I said softly. "It's about change. Show me you've learned. That's the price." She looked up, then eyes raw, her face stripped of arrogance. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the child Robert and I once raised. And in that moment, I knew the lesson had pierced deeper than any punishment I could have given. The weeks that followed inched forward like the slow opening of spring. Clarabelle kept her job at the cleaning service, though the schedule bruised her body. Each night, she returned with tired eyes and sore hands. But she didn't complain. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, scribbling as if the act itself anchored her. One evening, I finally asked, "What are you writing?" "Clarabelle." She glanced up, hesitant, then pushed the notebook toward me. The pages were filled with lists of schools, programs, application requirements. "Social work," she said. "If anyone would take me, I keep thinking, maybe I can use what I've been through to help someone else. Women like me, or worse." Her voice cracked on that last word, and for the first time I saw not only humility, but purpose in her eyes. "You're serious?" I asked. She nodded. "I've been talking to Lorraine, the older woman from my shift. She told me about her niece who works at a shelter downtown. They need volunteers. I could start there. The idea of my daughter mopping office floors had once felt like humiliation, but now the thought of her using that same determination for something beyond herself filled me with a different kind of pride. "You'll need to study," I said. "You'll need discipline. Respect doesn't just happen. You earn it." "I know," she replied softly. That weekend, we visited the villa together. The air smelled of salt and rosemary, the bush Robert had planted still thriving by the back steps. Clarabelle walked slowly through the rooms, her fingers brushing the door frames, her eyes shining with memory. "I was so blind," she murmured. "I saw walls and furniture. You saw roots." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Later, as we stood on the porch looking out at the ocean, she turned to me with a strange steadiness. "Mom, what if we didn't keep this just for us? What if we turned the villa into something bigger? A shelter, a place where women who've been hurt by men like Edward could find safety. You always said the house should mean more than stone and paint. Maybe this is what it's meant for." The wind caught her hair, carrying her words into the surf. For a long moment, I simply studied her, the same daughter who had once sold this house without a thought, now imagining it as sanctuary for others. "Are you certain?" I asked. She nodded. "I need to give back. I need to build something better than the life I chased before." Her conviction stirred something deep in me. Robert had always wanted the villa to outlive us, to hold not just our memories, but a future worth passing on. Perhaps this was the way. When we left, Clarabelle carried a small box of her childhood things, shells collected from the beach, an old journal, a framed photo of her with Robert on the porch. She held them gently, not like possessions, but like relics. That night at home, she spread her applications across the table while I prepared dinner. She asked me to check her essays to underline where her words faltered. I read lines filled with humility and resolve. She wrote about mistakes without excuses about work that taught her more than pride ever had. As I handed the papers back, I touched her shoulder lightly. "You're learning respect, Clarabelle. That's all I ever wanted." She met my eyes, and for the first time in years, I believed her change was real. Outside, the magnolia tree shivered in the night breeze. Inside, my daughter and I sat side by side, rebuilding something more fragile than wealth, but far stronger trust. The villa smelled of paint and lemons when we opened it again. Volunteers had come through during the past month, some friends of Clarabelle from her night shift, others women she'd met at the shelter downtown. They scrubbed walls, hauled furniture, and filled the kitchen cupboards with fresh plates and cups. By the time the last ladder was carried out, the house didn't feel like the place my daughter had once tried to sell. It felt like it had been waiting for this moment. We walked through slowly together that morning, sunlight slanting across polished floors. In the front bedroom, 2 twin beds stood side by side with quilts folded neatly. In the upstairs room, where Robert and I once hosted summer guests, there were shelves stocked with toiletries, stacks of towels, and a vase of wildflowers. Clarabelle had picked herself. She moved with quiet purpose, adjusting a pillow here, smoothing a curtain there. I could tell she wanted everything perfect for the first women who would walk through the door. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked me in the kitchen, her hand resting on the counter we'd scrubbed together. "It's more than enough," I said. "It's a beginning." That afternoon, as the sun slid toward the water, we carried a pot of tea out to the porch. The same porch Robert had built plank by plank when Clarabelle was 15. We sat side by side in the wicker chairs, the air rich with the smell of the ocean and jasmine. Clarabelle lifted her cup with both hands, her shoulders straighter than I'd seen in years. "I never imagined I'd be proud of cleaning bathrooms or filling out loan forms," she said with a faint smile. "But I am. I think Dad would be proud too." I looked out toward the horizon where the sea bled into sky. The waves carried a rhythm Robert used to hum to himself while fixing the truck or mending the porch rail. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice. "He is proud," I whispered. Clarabelle turned her face toward me, eyes glistening but steady. "Thank you for not rescuing me too soon, Mom. I hated you for it at first. I thought you were cruel, but now I see you gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost." "What's that myself?" Her words landed softly, the way the tide leaves shells on the shore, unassuming yet undeniable. We sat quietly after that, sipping tea, watching the gulls circle. From the open windows of the villa, I could hear the faint sound of women's voices. New arrivals settling into rooms, laughter mixed with the rustle of sheets. Life was already beginning to bloom inside these walls. Clarabelle reached over and touched my hand. "This house is going to be more than ours now. It's going to hold stories that heal, not break." I squeezed her fingers gently. "That's all I ever wanted. For this place to keep its heart." The sky turned a shade of rose as the sun sank. I leaned back, let the salt air fill my lungs, and felt a peace I hadn't known since Robert's last morning. In my heart, I spoke to him. She understands now. She knows respect. She knows love without condition, but also without blindness. She will not forget. The wind stirred across the porch, lifting the edge of the tablecloth like a nod of agreement. I closed my eyes, smiled, and let the moment settle into me. The door of the villa was open. And so finally were we.